Eagle Pass, Texas, April 25, 1875. Private Pompey Factor wipes the sweat from his eyes, clearing his vision of the near-apocalyptic sight before him. Sweeping down upon his position are dozens of incensed Comanche warriors, all intent not only on killing Pompey Factor and his 3 fellow soldiers, but hoping to accomplish this grisly task via the long, drawn-out tortures they have become famous for across the frontier. Factor and his mates are well aware that the coming minutes will spell either their doom or their salvation, and that the former scenario is far more likely. Pompey Factor, Sergeant John Ward, and trumpeter Isaac Payne, all members of a mixed-race Black and Seminole contingent of scouts attached to the famed Buffalo Soldiers, are locked in a desperate battle with an exponentially larger attacking force of Comanche warriors. Despite the cultural and ethnic mix present on the battlefield, the U.S. Army has, 10 years after the completion of the Civil War, still not changed their requirement that officers in command of these units be white. Thus, in command on this day is Lieutenant John Lapham Bullis. However, at this very moment, regardless of their personal backgrounds or the greater ramifications of United States federal policy, all 4 men are concerned solely with the immediate threat of the Comanche warriors now bearing down upon them. They are all experienced warriors. Lieutenant Bullis is a respected veteran of the Civil War, and not only have all these men spent the preceding year fighting the vicious Red River War, but these 3 scouts, Pompey Factor, John Ward, and Isaac Payne, have grown up in lives radically different from their cohorts serving in the Buffalo Soldiers. Following the abolition of slavery and the conclusion of the U.S. Civil War, the Army had formed 4 regiments of black soldiers, most of whom were former slaves. These regiments wasted no time in proving their skill and daring as they fought in campaigns against the Plains tribes, a conflict that had reignited with America's post-war revival of enthusiasm for westward expansion and for settlement. Though the origins of the term Buffalo Soldier are in fact highly contentious, one theory holds that the troopers were one of the few units outfitted with buffalo hide coats to combat the open plains winter chill, and the locally sourced and supplied buffalo coats presented a viable, affordable, and very effective solution to the Army's supply chain conundrums. Thus, oftentimes when a soldier from one of the newly formed regiments was seen for the first time by a Plains tribe warrior, he would be sporting one of the heavy, full-length buffalo coats. However, regardless of the origins of their name, the legacy of the Buffalo Soldiers, even 9 years after their inception, is one of notable gallantry and exceptional courage in combat. Many, if not most, of the men in these regiments see their service as an opportunity to prove their merit and worth in a country that, though it had granted them their freedom, was still deeply divided amongst itself and in many instances openly hostile towards them. But many of them also see this as a chance at adventure, to see lands that they had never seen before, and combat an enemy that most had only heard of. However, this is not the case for their cohorts in what are known as the Seminole Scouts. Though they are indeed of shared racial background with their fellow Buffalo Soldiers, they are in fact part of a rich and storied heritage of escaped slaves who had assimilated into various tribes in the American Southeast. Most prominent among these were the mighty Seminole, themselves a tribe who owned and traded slaves, though they also fought Southern slavers seeking to recapture their escaped slaves. They also combated the U.S. government's attempts to take over their own homelands, and warred incessantly with their hated enemies, the Creek. In the wake of what would come to be known as the Trail of Tears, the Seminole, along with many other eastern tribes, were forcibly relocated to what is today the state of Oklahoma. This resulted not only in inhumane treatment from the United States government, but a whole new danger in attacks from tribes native to the area, most notably the Kiowa and the Comanche. After years of enduring the misery of their newly imposed locale, the sizable number of mixed-race Seminole, weary of racial tensions and poor treatment from virtually all of their new neighbors, migrated to northern Mexico at the invitation of the Mexican government. Though Mexico had abolished slavery in 1837 and could guarantee some kind of reprieve from the antebellum tensions of America in 1850, their motives were also, in large part, self-serving. Much as they had with the Texans nearly 2 decades earlier, the Mexican government intended to use the settlers on the border as fodder of sorts for the Comanche, Kiowa, and Apache raids that had long terrorized the Mexican settlements to the north. Regardless, though they were no doubt aware of these problems to some degree, large numbers of Seminole moved south into the mountainous, rough-hewn borderlands that comprise northern Mexico. Here, for nearly 2 decades, they survived and even thrived in an entirely new and notoriously unforgiving environment while under relatively constant attack from the Comanche, the Kiowa, and the Apache. One of the most experienced scouts, Pompey Factor, had been born in 1849, the son of an escaped slave and a mother who belonged to the Biloxi tribe. His family, too, had grown tired of the constant turmoil in the South and elected to move to northern Mexico. Though most of the southeastern tribes were staunch Baptists, many, Pompey Factor included, were Jesuit-educated and well-read. Following the conclusion of the Civil War in 1865 and the abolition of slavery, many of the mixed-race Seminole ventured back north of the Rio Grande, and many had enlisted as scouts for the U.S. Army in order to assist in tracking down their old foes in the Kiowa, the Apache, and the Comanche. They are required to furnish their own horses, and they are subject to the orders of the Army officers, but otherwise, they operate with an autonomy unheard of in the Army at this time, and adding to their mystique amongst their fellow soldiers, the Scouts also remain far more adherent to their Seminole culture than anything else. Though most of them wear the blue-jacketed uniform of their Buffalo Soldier cohorts, the Seminole Scouts also sport the trappings of their native forefathers in the forms of leggings, moccasins, necklaces, and in some cases, even headdresses. They are held in awe, even by the toughened and already legendary Buffalo Soldiers, as unmatched trackers and fighters, capable of traveling unheard-of distances on half rations, and doing so repeatedly, day after day, until ultimately tracking down their enemy and emerging victorious. During the previous year's Red River War, they had been used to great effect by Colonel Reynolds Slidell Mackenzie as he had pursued Quanah Parker and those amongst the Comanche in northern Texas who refused to acquiesce to being confined to reservations in Oklahoma. They had all served with distinction, including Lieutenant Bullis, who had bolstered his reputation with several instances of personal bravery and selflessness that had solidified his deep bond with his men. His relationship with his men is described as more familial than militaristic. It was said that every time a scout had a new child, the lieutenant would visit their camp and act in place of a presiding chief, examining the baby and exclaiming that the child would indeed go on to grow strong and brave. This familial bond is a requirement for men who work in such small teams and in such remote places. The typical job of the Scouts sees them in conditions such as the ones they have found themselves in today on the Rio Grande River on a far more frequent basis than any of their comrades in the conventional forces. Lieutenant Bullis, Sergeant John Ward, Private Pompey Factor, and Private Isaac Payne had all been in hot pursuit of this raiding party, with the intention of catching them as they attempted to move their stolen horses across the river. The soldiers had all dismounted and snuck to within roughly 75 yards of where the Comanche were now pushing their horses across the river. All experienced fighters and keen to take the offensive, they had begun firing upon the Comanche, keeping up a relatively steady onslaught for nearly 45 minutes. During these early iterations of the battle, the scouts managed to kill 3 Comanches and wound 1 more. At first, due to the rate of fire and the sheer ferocity of the attack, the Comanche believed there to be a much larger force attacking them. The scouts are armed with .45 caliber Sharps carbines, as are the vast majority of troopers assigned to serve with the Buffalo Soldiers. These rifles represent a new wave of battlefield technology that has drastically changed the dynamics of combat in the West in the little over a decade since its implementation. Combatants of 10 to 20 years prior were limited to single-shot muskets and rifles whose cumbersome loading processes and maintenance requirements rendered them a liability against foes who are mounted on horses and capable of firing several arrows a minute. Though the advent of the Colt revolver had indeed been a massive jump forward for the American forces in combating the Plains tribes, it is only in relatively recent times when the average soldier and scout could count on being equipped with both long gun and sidearms that are capable of rapid rates of fire. However, as is the course through much of history, this technology does not exist in a vacuum, as for decades now, warriors of the Plains tribes have been acquiring revolvers and repeating rifles of their own. In this case, here on the Pecos River, this party of Comanche are armed with several Winchester lever-action rifles. Once they are able to discern that the force attacking them is not a sizable contingent of infantrymen, but a small group of 4 scouts, they begin to lay down a withering field of fire with their own weapons. In one of these exchanges, roughly 30 minutes into the fight, Sergeant Ward's rifle stock is shattered by a Comanche bullet, and in short order, the Comanche mount an offensive charge. This charge is the one now bearing down upon Pompey Factor and the other scouts. The nearly instantaneous decision is made to retreat to their horses, to mount up, and to ride for their lives now that the tide of battle has turned against them so decidedly. This is commonplace in combat on the Texas frontier, as either side saw little merit in last stands that few, if any, of their countrymen would ever even hear about. Factor, Barnes, and Payne quickly mount up and, in a matter of mere seconds, are riding north towards the relative safety of the larger force of Buffalo Soldiers. Lieutenant Bullis's horse, however, refuses to allow Bullis into the saddle. Somewhere in the chaos of the fight thus far, Bullis has also incurred a gunshot wound to his lower right leg. Though it is a flesh wound, it renders him significantly less mobile than his men. His horse, driven into a frenzy by the chaos of the battle, now spins in tight circles and nips at the cavalry officer, who can only make repeated and increasingly desperate attempts to gain a seat in the saddle. With every revolution of the wild-eyed horse and every passing second, Factor, Ward, and Payne get further away from Lieutenant Bullis, and the attacking Comanche draw nearer. But within moments, the men agree they cannot leave Lieutenant Bullis to die at the hands of the Comanche. So, all 3 of them wheel their horses around and charge headlong towards an attacking force that outnumbers them roughly 8-1. The men reach Lieutenant Bullis only moments before they are surrounded by dozens of charging Comanche warriors. This chaotic scene only serves to further frighten Lieutenant Bullis's whirling and wide-eyed horse, who again and again rebuffs the officer's efforts to get one of his boots in the stirrups and hoist himself into the saddle. As the lieutenant continues his efforts in vain, Factor, Ward, and Payne empty their rifles into the oncoming warriors, and almost immediately after his first shot, Ward's rifle is shot again, the stock completely shattered and the firing mechanism rendered warped and useless. The fight quickly devolves into a hand-to-hand struggle, with Factor, Barnes, and Payne clubbing and stabbing any warrior who rides within striking range as they do their best to dodge incoming arrows and form a loose three-man perimeter around the still struggling lieutenant. Now, the men are again pinned down. Still, Sergeant Ward manages to make his way to Lieutenant Bullis while Factor and Payne fight off the remaining attackers, actually managing to drive the Comanche into a brief retreat. For the better part of 2 hours, the four men fight off charge after charge from the incensed and incessant Comanche warriors, who only become more and more intent on killing their adversaries as more and more of their comrades fall. Finally, sensing an abatement in the action that might be long enough to grant them escape, the men make a mad dash to the north, with Lieutenant Bullis riding behind Sergeant Barnes, leaving behind the errant, crazed horse. They head towards Fort Clark, nearly 60 miles away. For the better part of a day and a night, the men make their way to the fort, alternating between carrying the wounded Lieutenant Bullis behind them as they continue to scan the countryside around them in search of more Comanche assailants. Finally, all four men miraculously arrive at Fort Clark. Lieutenant Bullis credits his men with repeatedly and publicly, quote, "saving my hair." Almost immediately upon their arrival at Fort Clark, Lieutenant Bullis files the necessary paperwork recommending all three enlisted scouts for the Medal of Honor, the United States military's highest award for bravery. On May 28, 1875, Private Pompey Factor, Private Isaac Payne, and Sergeant John Ward are each awarded the Medal of Honor, making them 3 of 18 total men who served with the Buffalo Soldiers who would earn such a distinction. While there is no record as to the personal thoughts of the men upon being awarded their medals, the events of April 25, 1875, will go on to speak volumes in posterity. For his part, Lieutenant Bullis would continue his service in the Army until 1898, retiring at the rank of Brigadier General. After retiring, he would move to San Antonio, Texas, where he served as the U.S. Deputy Treasurer for the Federal Sub-Treasury in San Antonio, essentially the government's local banker. He would serve there until his death in 1911. However, sadly, there is little information on the lives of Factor, Payne, and Ward after their military service. Pompey Factor appears to have first moved to northern Mexico, where he farmed for a number of years before moving just north of the border to Brackettville, Texas, where he would pass away in 1928. He was buried in Brackettville at the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery. The details of Isaac Payne's life are even more sparse, stating only that he moved to northern Mexico, also took up farming, and passed away in 1904. He was first buried in northern Mexico, but his remains were later returned to Texas and interred at the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery in Brackettville. John Ward would go on to serve until 1894, totaling 24 years in the U.S. Army before retiring to Brackettville. Here, he would make his living as a farmer until passing away in 1911. Like his comrades, Ward is interred at the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery in Brackettville. But while these three men represent some of the most awarded soldiers of their regiment, their story is not the only one of grit, determination, and survival amongst their ranks. Nor is it the only tale of the Comanche fighting against all odds to hold on to their way of life. However, the countless tales from all sides of great service, sacrifice, violence, and vengeance are, for tonight, other stories for other times. Northern Texas, October 10, 1871. With the morning sun still on the rise, a lone trooper of the U.S. Army's 4th Cavalry Division drives his horse hard as he attempts to make an escape from the Comanche warrior pursuing him. For the young soldier, known only to history as Private Greg, this warrior presents a horrifying sight, with his face and body smeared with black paint, the color of death. He wears a full-length headdress, its long streams of eagle feathers whipping behind him as he rides. He has large brass hoops in his ears, and his mouth is twisted in a ferocious snarl. As the young trooper urges his horse towards the line of his fellow soldiers, his eyes wide in panic, the Comanche warrior seems to be closing ground quickly upon him. Within seconds, it is clear to Private Greg that there will be no escape. If he is to survive, he will have to turn and fight. Now he wheels his horse around to face the oncoming Comanche, but seems to be frozen at the sight of the wild-eyed, war-paint-smeared warrior, now only yards away from him. His fellow soldiers, hunkered down in their defensive positions, begin firing upon the attacking warrior as they scream for Private Greg to draw his weapon and to fire. To their astonishment, the warrior actually begins riding in a zigzag pattern, keeping the American soldier between himself and his comrades' fire. The Comanche rides closer and closer, like a lion closing in on an injured gazelle, his eyes locked on the panicking young soldier who fumbles with his carbine, unable to chamber a bullet. The trooper now throws the carbine to the ground and attempts to draw his six-shooter as the warrior lets loose a blood-curdling war cry and draws his own pistol. Just as the soldier manages to bring his weapon to bear against the Comanche, a shot rings out, and the young American's head snaps back before he slumps to the ground with a sickening thud. The warrior lets loose another, even louder war cry, taunting the Americans as he defiantly faces them down. To all of these young soldiers, he seems to be the living embodiment of the Comanche warriors that they have heard so much about. Fearless, ferocious, and single-mindedly focused on killing each and every one of them. But this man is no average Comanche warrior. He is larger than most of his cohorts, powerfully built, and somehow he seems to disdain these white soldiers even more than his comrades do. And adding to his already distinctive appearance, it seems that underneath the thick black war paint that covers his face, he possesses some measure of European features, with a long, straight nose and high, prominent cheekbones. This is because he is, in fact, the son of a legendary Comanche chief and a white mother. His name is Quanah Parker. He is roughly 25 years old and already considered one of the fiercest warriors in what is perhaps the fiercest band of the Comanche, the Quahatis. He is well known all across the plains as a fearless fighter, an unflappable leader, and a vicious killer. But for months now, he has been only a specter to the Americans, a ghost of the southern plains who they have been unable to even locate, much less defeat. Now, as Quanah sits triumphant atop his sweat-drenched black horse, his eyes burning with a hatred that many of the young soldiers have never seen before, many of them seem momentarily frozen, almost mesmerized by the unfettered brutality of what they are witnessing. But within moments, every one of the Americans realizes that their comrade, Private Greg, has been only the first to fall. And now, Quanah and his warriors are coming for the rest of them. Most of them have scarcely ever seen a Comanche warrior before. They have only heard the stories of their ferocity in battle and their ruthless treatment of prisoners. The more experienced among them are even more aware of the stakes at hand, with many of them having been unfortunate enough to have found the charred and mutilated remains of those men who had been captured by the Quahati. But even for the few veteran soldiers among them, the speed at which this battle unfolds has been almost otherworldly. It had begun the night prior, at around midnight, when the Comanche had ambushed the soldiers' camp, intending to stampede all of their horses.
They had swarmed in amongst the herd, waving buffalo hides, ringing bells, and extorting the shrill war cries that cut through the night air. Even though they had been picketed to the ground, most of the animals had been so startled that they were driven to pull up the stakes that pinned them to the earth and to escape onto the open prairie. As this cyclone of horseflesh whirled about the camp, the officers in charge had ordered their men to get to any horse that they could at once. Even the most unseasoned among them knew that being stranded on the open plains without their mounts would mean an almost certain death. Among these officers was the 31-year-old Colonel Ranald Mackenzie. He was a Civil War veteran, having fought in the Battle of Gettysburg, the Battle of Antietam, the Overland Campaign, and at the Siege of Petersburg. He had been wounded at Gettysburg and at Bull Run, and while fighting in the Siege of Petersburg, where he had lost 2 of his fingers. But he was new to the frontier and to the ways of plains warfare. In a move that would be unthinkable for an experienced frontier fighter, he had allowed his troops to light fires after sunset, violating a central tenet of combating the Comanche. Fires during the night served effectively as beacons to any Comanche in the area, making the army camp an enticing and an easy target for Quanah and his band of raiders. In total, the Comanche had managed to stampede 70 of the army's horses and mules, but they were only getting started. It was dawn before the young Captain R.G. Carter had been sent out with a small detachment of soldiers from Troop G, along with Captain Charles H. Heil and a detachment of soldiers from Troop K, in order to inspect the losses incurred by the stampede. While they were out on their survey, they had all heard a lone gunshot ring out from somewhere in the nearby Blanco Canyon. Looking towards the canyon, several more Comanche were seen driving off several more horses. Captain Carter, Captain Heil, and the men had given chase, following the Comanche into the canyon. To be sure, this tactical error of giving chase to a small group of Comanche would have horrified the Texas Rangers of 30 years prior, who had lost countless men to this ruse before learning that following the Comanche into a canyon was a surefire recipe for death. Unfortunately for these young officers and their men, this was something they had not yet learned. Much like their commanding officer in Colonel Ranald Mackenzie, these men were neophytes to Comanche warfare. But they were all about to receive a harsh lesson from this band of Cohati. With the soldiers in pursuit, the warriors had ridden hard into the canyon, then crested a small bluff. Carter and his men had followed closely behind them, but just as they crested the bluff, they had been greeted by the horrifying sight of dozens of Comanche warriors swarming at the base of the bluff below them. At first sight of the soldiers, they had charged up the hill in a head-on attack. Later, in recounting what he saw, Carter would recall that, quote, "It was like an electric shock. For a moment the blood seemed fairly congealed, for we realized what the ruse of the Indians had been and knew now that their purpose had been to lead us into the ambuscade. The soldiers had then made what should have been another critical mistake by dismounting and forming a firing line. But in a rare case of unmounted enemies dissuading a Comanche charge, they had been able to fire in a disciplined and unrelenting manner that did eventually scatter the attacking warriors. Despite their momentary success, though, Carter's first sight of the Comanche in their full war regalia would be forever burned into his memory. He recounted the incredible display by saying that, quote, "They were naked to the waist, were arrayed in all war paint and trinkets, with headdress of war bonnets or fur or feathers fantastically ornamented. Their ponies, especially the white, cream, and dun, were striped and otherwise artistically painted and decorated with gaudy stripes of flannel and calico. Bells were jingling, feathers waving, and with jubilant, discordant yells that would have put to blush any Confederate brigade of the Civil War, and uttering taunting shouts, they pressed on to what they surely considered to be their legitimate prey." End quote. Then, suddenly, the top of the canyon's walls seemed to explode with Comanche women crying out in high-pitched wails and ringing bells of their own, exhorting their men to fight on. The flashes of signal mirrors also flittered about the canyon, as the Comanche signaled charges and retreats to each other. As the Comanche had mounted another charge, Captain Carter and the men of Troop G had made a stand against them, firing intermittently as they worked their way back down the bluff and towards the canyon walls. Meanwhile, Captain Heil and the men of Troop K had retreated back down the canyon in the other direction, back towards the Army's main camp and the headquarters of Colonel Mackenzie. By the time they had arrived, Mackenzie and his men had already heard the gunshots from the canyon and were already making ready to mount a relief effort. Back in the canyon, Lieutenant Carter and his men had continued their strategic retreat back to the side of their horses that they had left picketed at the bottom of the bluff. Here, the men had mounted up and then attempted to make a dash back towards Mackenzie's camp. Quanah and his warriors had quickly closed ground with them, but all the troopers had managed to get away. All, that is, except for Private Gregg, whose ailing gray horse had faltered, causing him to be the unlucky soldier who fell victim to the wrath of Quanah. Now, as his body lies lifeless on the cold ground, still steaming in the rays of the morning sun, it seems all but certain to Carter and his men that they are going to be next. But in a move that perplexes all of the soldiers, Quanah lets loose a last, long war cry before turning his horse and riding away. His fellow warriors, as well, also turn their mounts and ride away, heading up the sloping embankments of the canyon back towards their women and children. Though Carter and the men are unsure as to why this has happened, all of them feel an odd mixture of relief and confusion. Then, the reason becomes clear. Behind them, Colonel Ranald Mackenzie, along with his company of cavalrymen and his contingent of native Tonkawa scouts, are now barreling towards the Comanche. Seeking to protect their women and children, Quanah and his warriors have decided to make a rare retreat. Now, they scatter onto the plains, just as Mackenzie's contingent of men reaches Carter and the soldiers of Troop G. Normally, a retreat such as this would signal the end of an engagement. But Mackenzie did not come here to simply fight Quanah and his men to a standstill. He has come here, to the high plains of Texas, to wage total warfare. His mission is to break the will of the Comanche and to drive them onto the reservations in Oklahoma. Seeing that the Comanche women and children are also present, he knows that this is a rare opportunity to capture an entire village of the elusive Quahati and to strike a decisive blow to the Comanche as a whole. But in the short time that it has taken him to secure the battlefield, to reconvene with Carter and the men of Troop G, and to collect the remains of the unfortunate Private Gregg, Quanah and his band of Comanche have already disappeared into the rolling landscape of the plains. Mackenzie now orders his Tonkawa scouts, longtime enemies of the Comanche, to take to the Comanche's trail. With Mackenzie and his men following closely behind, the scouts fan out onto the open prairie, looking for signs of the Comanche. But Quanah Parker and his band of warriors, along with their women and children, have no intention at all of surrendering to the United States government. They are, effectively, the last vestiges of the mighty Comanche who have still refused to acquiesce to the United States' demands, and they intend to fight until the bitter end. This makes them a particularly dangerous enemy, and every soldier and scout now in pursuit of Quanah and his people are well aware of this troubling fact, as they venture further and further out into the open, seemingly featureless expanses of the grasslands. As they follow the Tonkawa scouts away from the canyon, no man among them can shake the unnerving sensation that they are being watched. But Mackenzie will not be dissuaded. Throughout the late morning and well into the afternoon, they follow the Comanche's circuitous trail. Finally, the exasperated Tonkawa scouts report to Mackenzie that the Comanche seem to have doubled back, heading back towards the west and to the cover of Blanco Canyon. Mackenzie's contingent now doubles back themselves, following the trail until daylight, when Mackenzie orders them to make camp not far from the same place they had begun their trek this morning. They spend a restless night attempting to rest themselves and their horses before again picking up the trail at daybreak and heading out the next morning. Now, they again pick up the Comanche trail, only to find that they have again disappeared into the expanses of the open plains. With the scouts leading the way, Mackenzie and his men again follow the trail. After spending another taxing morning in pursuit of the Comanche, they finally spot Quanah and his small band a few miles away. And now, the fight resumes again. Dozens of warriors now mount an attack on the soldiers, flanking them from the left and from the right, attempting to draw the soldiers into breaking their formation and diverting them from pursuing the Comanche women and children. But having learned his lesson from his prior experience in Blanco Canyon, Mackenzie refuses to order an all-out attack on the parties of warriors on his flanks. Instead, he doggedly maintains his pursuit of the Comanche's families. After being unable to entice Mackenzie into attacking, Quanah and his warriors retreat back to their families, hoping to usher them forward even faster before they can be captured by Mackenzie and his men. Then, in a fortuitous break for the Comanche, the sky soon darkens, and soon a bone-chilling wind begins to cut through the air, followed not long after by a thick, soggy snow that soon covers the ground. Finally, at dusk, Mackenzie orders his men to stop and to make camp. After another long, miserable night enduring the cold, a clear morning breaks. And now, roughly a mile away, Mackenzie can see the fleeing Comanche. But instead of ordering a head-on charge, he pauses to consider the situation. While he does indeed have his enemy in sight, his men are now bedraggled from several hard days of fighting and travel. His ammunition and rations have begun to wane. And, having traveled so far afield, they are now roughly 100 miles away from their nearest reinforcements at Fort Sumner in New Mexico. A head-on attack now might indeed break the Comanche, but it may also come at great cost. A cost that Mackenzie soon decides that he is not willing to pay. And so, he decides to let discretion be the better part of honor, and now orders a return to Blanco Canyon, intending to then make his way back to Fort Richardson. The capture of Quanah and his Quahati villagers will have to wait for another day. As the Comanche continue to make their way to the northwest, Mackenzie and his men ride back towards Blanco Canyon, arriving the next day after yet another frigid night on the plains. As the exhausted scouts and soldiers finally near the canyon, most of them, Mackenzie included, are plagued by a sense of dejection, having gotten so close to their quarry, yet now returning with nothing to show for all their efforts. Then, suddenly, a cry goes out. "Indians! Indians!" The Tonkawa scouts have spotted 2 Comanche warriors in a small ravine jutting out from the canyon. The soldiers rush to block off any escape from the ravine, and Mackenzie orders 15 of his Tonkawa scouts to pursue the Comanche into the ravine on foot. The scouts eagerly plunge into the ravine, their spirits now rekindled at the prospect of drawing Comanche blood. But several minutes later, Mackenzie and the rest of his men still have heard nothing, and they have seen no sign of the Comanche nor the Tonkawa scouts. Growing frustrated, Mackenzie dismounts and ventures into the ravine himself, along with Lieutenant Peter Bohm. They slowly make their way forward, scanning their surroundings for any sign of the Tonkawa scouts or for the Comanche. But they do not see anything. For a moment, both men stand in silence. Then, a sharp whizzing sound cuts through the air, and a Comanche arrow embeds itself into the upper thigh of Mackenzie. In great pain, Mackenzie now limps out of the canyon, being helped along by Lieutenant Bohm. The field surgeon, a man by the name of Dr. Choate, examines his wound and begins to work on extracting the arrow, digging into the fleshy part of Mackenzie's thigh in order to extract the barbed arrowhead. As Mackenzie stoically endures this, the ravine suddenly erupts in a cacophony of war cries and gunshots as the Tonkawa and Comanche finally commence a vicious battle just out of sight of the Americans. But, however ferocious, the fighting is short-lived, and the 15 Tonkawa soon emerge victorious, with the 2 Quahati warriors now lying dead in the dirt at the bottom of the ravine. Examining the battle site afterwards, Captain Carter would note that, quote, one was shot several times through the body, the other through the head. One had been shot in the hand while firing his pistol. The bullet had shattered the pistol butt. A bloody bowstring showed that he had tried to use his bow later. With the strength necessary to draw that string, it must have proven very painful, and a clear test of the Indian's wonderful courage, tenacity, and stoical nature under such circumstances." End quote. Before finally moving on to make camp for the evening, Dr. Choate and a Lieutenant Wentz C. Miller made their way to the fallen warriors and methodically decapitated them, placing their heads in gunny sacks. The gunny sacks, dripping with gore, are then carried to the Army campsite and then placed into cauldrons of boiling water in order to remove their flesh and preserve the skulls for, quote, scientific research. The following day, Lieutenant Miller invites Captain Carter to join him for lunch at his campsite. Eager to finally be able to enjoy a hot meal and to relax after such an arduous few days, Captain Carter peeks into the bubbling cauldrons that he believes holds their noontime meal. But he is instead greeted by the degloved heads of the 2 slain Comanche warriors. Carter, revolted and now having lost his appetite, returns to his men, who are camped a few hundred yards away. He is so troubled by what he has seen, he even orders the camp to be moved further downstream, out of sight of Dr. Choate's ghoulish experiments. Meanwhile, Colonel Mackenzie lies racked with pain from the arrow wound to his thigh. But this is not the first time that he has been wounded in action, and despite his agony, he remains myopically focused, perhaps now more so than ever, on capturing Quanah Parker and his rogue band of Quahatis. In the following days, he will again lead his men out onto the prairies in search of any remaining sign of the Comanche. But after 5 long days, Mackenzie, now in constant, terrible pain, relents and orders a return to Fort Richardson. It will be October 18th, more than a week after the Comanche had first stampeded their horses, that the 4th Cavalry will straggle back into Fort Richardson in the midst of yet another unyielding snowstorm. Though Colonel Mackenzie has failed to capture Quanah Parker, he has managed to catch sight of the legendary Comanche, and, despite the difficulties he has faced, Mackenzie still believes that he is the man who will finally be able to apprehend the mighty rogue chief of the Quahati, and to end the Comanche Wars once and for all. In the coming year, he will resume his tireless quest, and the result will change Texas history forever. For his part, Quanah has succeeded in driving off the U.S. Army, and in preserving the freedom of his small band of loyal followers. But as he ponders the events of the past few days over a campfire somewhere out on the open expanses of the prairies, he knows that his troubles are only beginning. Mackenzie will return, he is sure, and when he does, Quanah Parker and his warriors will be ready for him. But the stories of the battles to come, which will forever change the history of the Old West, are too numerous to cover here in one episode. For tonight, those are other stories for other times.
Northern Texas, September 28, 1874, 5 a.m. In the eerie dark of the pre-dawn morning, the men of the U.S. Army's 4th Cavalry and their horses nervously peer down a nearly vertical embankment. Then, after a few tense moments, the riders dismount and lead their horses over the edge, the angle being so steep that the animals' hind legs nearly touch their stomachs. In the darkness, the men cannot even see the bottom of the embankment, but can only trust in the orders of their officers and resolved themselves to complete this seemingly impossible task. And, as every one of them well knows, this will be only the first of many such tasks that will be asked of them on this day. For they are under the command of one of the Army's most promising, most aggressive, and most demanding young leaders, Colonel Ranald Mackenzie. And Mackenzie has been charged with completing a mission that has plagued the U.S. Army for decades, finding and defeating the Comanche. This has been made even more difficult by the fact that this band of Comanches they are searching for have joined forces with their longtime allies the Kiowa and their new allies the Cheyenne and Arapaho in order to evade and resist Mackenzie. And, finally, to make all of this even more complex, Mackenzie would have to find them in the midst of the labyrinthian confines of Texas's massive Palo Duro Canyon. But after weeks of searching with his Tonkawa native scouts, Mackenzie has finally located the village of the Comanche and their allies, and now he seeks to make his attack. Time is of the essence, and Mackenzie drives his men hard. This is nothing new to them, as it is well known that their commander is not only a strict disciplinarian, but absolutely unrelenting in his pursuit of his enemy. Though his irascible reputation is well-accepted fact amongst his men, it is also well accepted that his bravery is indisputable. Mackenzie, born to a prominent naval family that included legendary naval officer Commodore Matthew C. Perry, graduated first academically in his class at West Point. Graduating in 1862, his class was among the first newly minted officers to see combat in the Civil War. And, for his part, Ranald Mackenzie saw some of the most violent, brutal fighting in the entirety of the war. He distinguished himself in some of the Civil War's deadliest battles, including the Second Battle of Bull Run, the Battle of Antietam, and the Battle of Gettysburg. By war's end, Mackenzie would be seriously wounded a staggering 7 times. Now, nearly a decade later, his body bore testament to what he had endured, with his right hand being so severely mangled that the Comanche had taken to calling him Bad Hand. It was also increasingly rumored amongst his men and commanders alike that Mackenzie's mind may also bear the scars of the horrors he had survived, as his behavior was becoming increasingly more volatile and erratic. Still, at this time, he is considered one of the most revered combat officers in the whole of the United States Army, and has been entrusted with this task of hunting down the Comanche and their allies for good reason, as there are few men more qualified for the job. After ascertaining the location of the Comanche camp, Mackenzie has ordered an attack at first light. He knows, as do all of his men, that the element of surprise will be critical. If the Comanche and their allies detect their presence, they will simply meld into the canyon's infinite confines and carry on to fight another day. As far as Mackenzie is concerned, this is a wholly unacceptable option. And, thus, his men continue to pour down the impossibly steep incline before congregating at the bottom on the canyon floor. Many of them have found the descent more terrifying than any battle they have yet fought, and struggle to regain control of their nerves before the upcoming attack. Now, it is just before 6 a.m., and Mackenzie's native scouts point out the direction of the village. This large village has gone undetected to virtually everyone but the Tonkawa scouts. However, it is only roughly 1 mile away. The soldiers continue to lead their horses over the rocky ground of the canyon floor, deliberately moving towards the village with the Tonkawa scouts leading the way. The trek is slow and cautious, and it is nearly 7 a.m. before the soldiers are within striking distance of the village. Even at this range, miraculously, The inhabitants of the village still have seemingly no idea that the cavalry is present. With every step closer to the village, Mackenzie and his men are more and more heartened at the fact that they have managed to get so close, still completely unnoticed. Then, just as the sun begins to peek over the canyon walls, the sharp retort of barking dogs cuts through the morning air. The army soldiers have been discovered. Only a few short moments after the first dog begins to sound the alert to his masters, the entire village seemingly explodes into a fury of activity, with mothers and children bursting out of their lodges and running for the confines of the canyon. Now, Mackenzie orders his men to mount a head-on attack into the village, hoping to strike when the Comanches and their allies are at their weakest. This village, Mackenzie well knows, is under the leadership of some of the fiercest, most legendary chiefs of the Comanche, the Kiowa, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho, ones that he has spent years pursuing, such as Lone Wolf, Poor Buffalo, and Quanah Parker. The warriors here will likely be more concerned with defending their families than mounting offensive attacks. But they are largely highly capable, very experienced warriors. The soldiers' best chance for success lies in striking the village hard and hitting it immediately. But as the men charge into the village, they are met by relatively few defenders, ones seemingly intent on creating a distraction for their escaping comrades more than mounting a serious defensive stand. This, however, does not diminish the ferocity of the soldiers' charge. And it especially does not affect those at the forefront of the attack, the Tonkawa scouts. The sight of the oncoming Tonkawa perhaps causes more terror in the hearts of the Comanche mothers than does that of the oncoming soldiers. In the decades-long intertribal warfare between the Comanche and the Tonkawa, there have been countless instances in which entire villages of both sides have been slaughtered. Thus, virtually every woman and child in the village now flees in terror, as their warriors still defending the village begin to fall. For all of the fighting spirit of the warriors on the canyon floor attempting to fight off the soldiers and scouts, they are quickly overrun. By 9 a.m., the fighting is over, and roughly 60 defenders lie dead on the ground. But the vast majority of the Comanche have managed to escape further into the canyon under the leadership of their chiefs. Quanah Parker, in particular, stands out as an unshakable leader during the Comanche's retreat, guiding his people to safety and away from the chaos and danger of the battle site. But for all of Quanah's vaunted leadership, he and his people face one seemingly intractable problem. They are all now on foot. The Comanche's entire way of life is based around the horse. They are perhaps the finest horsemen on the plains, and far and away the richest tribe in terms of pure horse flesh. But now, virtually the entirety of their 1,000+ head of horses lie under the control of Colonel Ranald Mackenzie and the 4th Cavalry. And while it might seem that the sudden influx of such a number of horses would be an unmitigated blessing to an Army cavalry officer, the newly gotten horse herd presents a sizable problem. Mackenzie's forces number roughly 400 men, with feed and supplies for several hundred horses, but no more. Thus, taking the entire herd with them would be virtually impossible. Turning them loose would also be a problem, as most would likely soon be recaptured by the Comanche. This would instantly negate any advantage Mackenzie had just gained, and again make the Comanche and their allies a viable threat across the southern plains. But in the midst of such a dilemma, Mackenzie sees great possibility. No force in Army history has been in such a position to issue such a devastating blow to the Comanche by depriving them of their most critical resource. And so, he issues a command that will haunt his legacy forever. He orders that the troopers select a small number, estimates range from 300 to 400, of the best, most suitable horses for cavalry use. Then he orders the rest, over 1,000 horses, to be shot. For the following hours, nearly until sundown, the cavalry soldiers herd the horses into smaller ravines branching off from the main canyon and summarily annihilate them. Many of the men find themselves deeply horrified by the order, and contemporary accounts gravely remark on haunting memories of gunfire and horse screams echoing about the canyon walls in a macabre symphony. By nightfall, the deed is done, and Mackenzie, for his part, seems pleased that his orders have been carried out. It seems now, to the veteran officer, that the days of the Comanche and their allies on the open plains are numbered. He knows that without their horses, they will be all but helpless. But the Comanche will not surrender immediately. Under Quanah Parker's leadership, they will flee even further into the confines of the canyon, evading army incursions throughout the fall. But the coming winter of 1874 to 1875 would prove to be one of the harshest in decades, and little by little, many Comanche trickled into the nearest fort, Fort Sill, in order to simply survive. In fact, it would not be until the summer of 1875 that Quanah Parker would lead his band of the final remaining holdouts into Fort Sill, officially surrendering to U.S. Army forces and resigning themselves to life on the reservation. However, while this new lifestyle was devastating to many of the Comanche and to other Plains tribes, Quanah Parker, himself the half-white child of a revered Comanche chief, would adapt well and largely thrive in his new life. He would work for the equitable treatment of his tribe, become a successful businessman, and the owner of an expansive homestead in Oklahoma known as Star House, where he would host such esteemed guests as Geronimo and Teddy Roosevelt. He would become a transitional figure, a warrior of the plains who was now the proud owner of a 1900s luxury car. He would ultimately die in 1911 at the age of 62, his life becoming the stuff of Old West legend. Sadly, for Colonel Ranald Mackenzie, he would meet a far different end. After his exploits in the Palo Duro Canyon, his already formidable reputation quickly rose to him being considered the finest field officer on the entirety of the American frontier. In 1876 to 1877, he would be called north by the Army to combat the Utes and the Lakotas in other successful campaigns. And by 1882, he was held in such high esteem that he was promoted to brigadier general at the age of 42, making him one of the youngest men to ever hold the rank. He was then given command of the entire jurisdiction of Texas, a massive responsibility, and a clear indication of the faith which his commanding officers had in him. However, by the early 1880s, his symptoms of physical and mental decline were also becoming more and more evident. In addition to his numerous wounds suffered throughout the Civil War, he had also suffered several concussions while in service on the frontier. By 1883 and into 1884, his condition was beginning to severely affect his job performance. Incidents of his issuing contradictory orders, suffering violent mood swings, and being unable to focus and then falling into periods of paranoia and despair were reported by several contemporary sources, and by mid-1884, Mackenzie was officially declared unfit to serve and forced into retirement. Varying accounts point to the root cause being epilepsy, brain damage, or perhaps deterioration from a long-suffering syphilis infection. Whatever the cause, after his discharge, Mackenzie was brought home to New York by his family and placed into an asylum on Staten Island, New York. Here, he would spend his final years falling into a state of deeper and deeper disconnection from reality before finally passing away in 1889 at the age of only 48, with the cause of death being listed as dementia. Mackenzie would be laid to rest in the West Point Cemetery, fittingly interred where his journey had begun. Ranald Mackenzie presents one of the most complex, ruthless, and tragic figures in the history of the Old West, one whose impact on history is rivaled by few others. But for all of his military accomplishments, it is his ordering of the slaughter of the horses at Palo Duro Canyon that has left the most indelible mark on his legacy. It also deeply influenced Comanche culture, viewed even today as a great tragedy not only physically, but spiritually, as the horse is held in great reverence by the culture who depended on it so greatly for their survival. Depending on who you ask, the tragedy may have left an indelible mark on the location of the village itself, as many accounts claim the hoofbeats and whinnies of the massacred herd can still be heard on quiet nights even today. However, no matter how horrifying, this story is but one instance of the inhumanity and brutality that riddle the history of the Red River War. The accounts of brutal combat between the U.S. Army and the Comanche, the Kiowa, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho are virtually endless, and all deserve their own episode. But for tonight, those are other stories for other times.
West Texas, 1850. As the afternoon sun beats down upon them, legendary Texas Ranger Bigfoot Wallace and a number of inexperienced Texian gunmen lie motionless on the dusty, rocky ground, doing their best not to move a muscle. Only minutes earlier, they had been enjoying a midday break from their arduous journey from San Antonio to El Paso when they had been attacked by a roving band of 27 Comanche warriors. A short fight, lasting only a few minutes, had unfolded between the Texians and the Comanche, only to see the Comanche disappear over a nearby ridgeline. But Bigfoot Wallace knows that this fight has just begun. Suddenly, they see the figures of several Comanche warriors in the brush roughly 75 yards away. The warriors move cautiously, looking directly towards them, but they cannot see the Texians in the thick brush. Believing their enemy to have left the battlefield, the warriors begin to cautiously make their way towards the Texians' wagon. Wallace can hear the younger men with him begin to stir. These Comanche warriors present an easy target, and after the fight they have just endured, the more inexperienced among them are eager to take down any Comanche that they can. But Wallace orders them to hold their fire. He knows that this warrior is very likely not alone. Several minutes drag by, with every passing second increasing the young Texians' desire to pull their triggers. In spite of this, each one of them dutifully follows Wallace's orders. But the veteran ranger's next order gives them all pause. "Now, boys," whispers the hulking 6'2", 240-pound Wallace, "run down and tumble under the wagon like you were nearly scared to death." The younger men hesitate, but only for a moment. Wallace has been here many times before, they all reckon, and following his lead is undoubtedly their best chance at surviving this fight. And so, they light out for the wagon, all of them, including Wallace, wailing and moaning all the way, fully committing to the role of fleeing, frightened opponents. As they all slide under the wagon, the Comanche erupt in a roar of insults and chiding laughter, calling the Texians cowards and squaws. Disgusted with his enemy's actions, the Comanche chief tells his warriors that they now have free rein to attack the cowering Texans at their leisure. Soon after, a volley of arrows slams into the wagon, with several of them embedding themselves into the vehicle and others sticking into the ground, just missing their targets. The nerves of the younger Texians under the wagon now, understandably, begin to rattle, but Wallace remains unmoved. Suddenly, a Comanche bullet slams into the metal ring that surrounds the wagon wheel, known as the tire, splitting the tire and ricocheting into the upper chest of Texian Adolf Fry. But the wound is not serious, and the Texians continue to hold their ground. Though the fight is rapidly escalating, all among them continue to trust that if they are going to be caught in a Comanche ambush, Bigfoot Wallace is the man they want to be trapped with. Wallace, born William Alexander Anderson Wallace in Lexington, Virginia, is 33 years old and already a legend on the Texas frontier. He hails from the proud Scottish lineage of the legendary William Wallace and has thus far held true to his family's reputation as stalwart warriors and irascible individualists. He had come to Texas in 1837 at the age of 20 and immediately became deeply enamored with the adventure and the danger that the new republic had to offer. Within months of his arrival, Wallace was involved in a gunfight with native warriors, and soon after this, he had been captured by an unknown tribe, generally believed to be the Lipan Apache, while out hunting on his farm near LaGrange, Texas. He was held for a number of months, living with the tribe, before finally being returned to LaGrange. He then visited the ruins of the Alamo, only a few years old by the time Wallace laid eyes on them. Soon after, while living in Austin, Wallace was given the name of Bigfoot by some of the local citizenry. The accounts of exactly how he got this name vary. Some sources say it was because he had shot and killed a feared local chief named Bigfoot. Others said that it was his hulking size and literal big feet that earned him the moniker. In either case, the name stuck. Bigfoot Wallace would continue on over the subsequent 13 years to play a part in countless episodes of Texas frontier history. He would take part in what would become the Mexican-American War, fighting in several legendary engagements including the Battle of Salado, the Battle of Hondo River, and the Battle of Mier, where he and 241 other Texians would be captured by General Pedro de Ampudia. Wallace and the other Texians were taken first to the city of Saltillo in the state of Coahuila, Mexico, before being marched to the city of Salado. Shortly after being captured, 181 of the Texian prisoners had attempted to escape, but Wallace and all but 5 other prisoners had been recaptured after suffering greatly in the northern Mexico deserts, and then summarily marched back to Saltillo in irons. Here, the embarrassed and infuriated General Santa Anna had ordered that a rare form of military punishment, one whose roots harkened back to the Roman Empire, be meted out upon the escapees. He ordered the execution of every 10th man among the Texians, a practice known amongst the Romans as decimation. To decide who amongst them would live and who would die, the prisoners would be forced to draw lots by reaching into a clay jar filled with 159 white beans and 17 black beans. Those who drew the white bean would be left alive in order to continue out their captivity under the Mexican army. Those who drew a black bean were to be immediately executed by firing squad. Wallace would be fortunate enough to draw a white bean and ultimately survive this harrowing ordeal. However, many of these men, Wallace included, would soon question their luck as they were marched to the city of Perote and locked inside the walls of the notorious Perote prison. Here, the cramped, filthy conditions spread sickness rapidly amongst the men, seeing 40 of them quickly succumb to various infectious diseases. It was said that here Wallace had, quote, went wild and had to be tied down. The imposing Texan had descended so far into a temporary madness that local villagers would come to view him as if he was part of some traveling sideshow. One account of this time recalls 2 daughters of wealthy local politicians being allowed into his room in order to view his condition up close. The women had heard the stories circulating about town of, quote, El Grande Americano Loco, as Wallace had come to be known, the prisoner who was so crazed that he destroyed any room he was kept in. What they found instead was a huddled, muttering shell of a man, with a bedsheet wrapped around his head and shoulders as if shielding his face. It would be nearly 2 weeks before he had recovered enough to work on the chain gangs again. Wallace's confinement at Perote prison would last a total of 22 months until he was released on the 5th of August, 1844. From here, he had made his way to Veracruz and then to New Orleans. Soon after, Wallace had made his way back to Texas, where he spent the rest of the decade serving as a Texas Ranger, fighting against the Comanche and his most hated foe, the Mexican Army. By 1850, he had signed on with the mail train service operating between San Antonio and El Paso. Now, as he and his cohorts huddle under their mail wagon, weathering a deluge of Comanche arrows, Wallace knows that he will likely be the defining factor in his younger companion's survival. As Adolph Fry now writhes in pain from his newly incurred chest wound, Wallace does his best to eye the nearby hilltop. For too long now, none of the Comanche warriors have shown themselves. Minutes drag by, as no more war whoops are heard and no more arrows fall. Finally, though, 5 Comanche appear at the crest of the hill, cautiously moving towards the mail train, assuming the Texians to have all been killed. As his companions begin to stir excitedly, Wallace again calmly and quietly orders them to hold their fire. He waits until the Comanche are yards away from the mail train before ordering his men to open fire. "Now, men," Wallace commands, "every man for his Indian. Take good aim and fire." With this, the Texians unleash a ferocious volley from underneath the wagon. Instantly, the Comanche leading the group of warriors tumbles from his horse, slamming into the hard ground. Another of the warriors also falls from his horse with a sickening thud, quickly succumbing to his wounds. The Comanche flee back over the ridge and out of sight, as Wallace and his men hurriedly reload and then nervously refocus their attention to the ridgeline, anticipating another attack to come at any second. But after several minutes, no Comanche appear. It seems, for now, they have left the battlefield. However, Wallace again sternly commands his men not to leave the cover of the wagon. He tells them that, though the Comanche have likely given up the fight, they will not leave their dead comrades here. In the previous decade, the Texians themselves had made it a regular practice to scalp and otherwise mutilate any dead Comanche left behind. This was also the case in the intertribal warfare the Comanches often found themselves engaged in with the Tonkawa and the Apache. To combat this, the Comanche have taken to removing their dead warriors from the battlefield by any means necessary. Within a few more minutes, the Texians see just how committed the Comanche are to retrieving their fellow tribesmen. The loops of Comanche rawhide ropes can soon be seen sailing over the ridgeline in attempts to rope their dead comrades and bring them back to their lines to be taken home for a proper burial. The men underneath the wagon cannot see the warriors behind the ridgeline, and thus they cannot gain a clear line of fire with which to take a shot. They can only watch as the Comanche make attempt after attempt at throwing their loops and catching the limbs of their dead warriors. But finally, after countless tries, they succeed in retrieving both of their comrades and then spiriting away to the northwest and to the safety of the open plains. Now, Wallace and his men hurriedly regroup and make their way back to the nearest U.S. Army fort, Fort Clark, about 40 miles west of the town of Uvalde. Wallace, knowing that they will almost certainly be attacked again if they simply carry on, now intends to procure a military escort for the remainder of their trip back to San Antonio. But at Fort Clark, he is told that they cannot spare any men to accompany him, and that he will have to carry on further west to Fort Inge, about 4 miles south of Uvalde, and there make another request. Wallace and his men make the treacherous journey, some 35 miles, before arriving at Fort Inge and again being informed that they will not be granted a military escort. The commanding officer of Fort Inge tells Wallace that he cannot send his men with him to San Antonio because he fears a large number of them might desert. Disgusted, Wallace pens a scathing letter to U.S. Army headquarters in San Antonio, denouncing the officer's dismissiveness and decrying the slovenly nature of the troops. Then, he and his men travel the 4 miles north to Uvalde, where Wallace hires his own security contingent with money from his own pocket. He and his men then make the 85-mile trip east to San Antonio, where they arrive with their wagons still full of Comanche arrows. Here, they are met by General Kirby Smith, commander of the U.S. Army forces in San Antonio. The general has received Wallace's letter shortly before Wallace's actual arrival, and he resolutely informs Wallace that the men at Fort Inge will be soundly disciplined for their lack of resolve, as will their commanding officer. The general sends word that the soldiers at Fort Inge are to be sent on a long scouting mission, over 100 miles round trip through the West Texas desert. Wallace and his men would go on to finish their trip to El Paso and then back to San Antonio, where Wallace would go on to continue his service with the mail train and intermittently as a Texas Ranger. He would eventually outlive the vast majority of his Ranger companions, passing away at the age of 81 in 1899. But this story of Wallace's encounter with the Comanche in the wilds of West Texas is but one short story from his expansive life. A life full of adventure, hardship, violence, and loyalty to his beloved state of Texas. However, for tonight, those are other stories for other times.
Fort Colorado, Texas, late March 1837. As a full moon illuminates the hill country and prairie lands around them, a small contingent of Texas Rangers while away the cool spring evening ensconced in conversation, card games, and the whine of a fiddle played by Ranger Noah Smithwick. The more senior veterans of this ad hoc frontier force regale their younger comrades with stories of past fights with the fearsome, venerable Comanche. The Rangers' very existence and their presence at this fort located in what is now southeast Austin is the product of Texas's ongoing fight against the ruling lords of the southern plains. The Comanche have spent the previous century clearing nearly the whole of Texas of any peoples who sought to oppose their claims to these lands. It had first been the Apache, then the Spanish, then the Mexicans, who had suffered the brunt of Comanche raiding and warfare. Innumerable times in just the preceding few years, entire families had been laid waste to, the men killed outright or subjected to vicious torture killings, and the women and children taken prisoner and oftentimes either killed themselves or subjugated to a life of slavery. The Comanche, once a downtrodden people relegated to the hinterlands of the northern Rockies, had risen to prominence with the acquisition of the horse in the 17th century. Though many tribes had been the beneficiaries of the diaspora of horses onto the open plains following the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, it was the Comanche in particular who had taken to the animal with a seemingly intrinsic, inexplicable ease. Their penchant for horsemanship and their capabilities as a mounting and raiding warfare machine had rapidly become the stuff of gruesome folklore across all of Texas. And for generations now, military forces, including the likes of the Spanish and the Mexican army, had tried and failed to stem the tide of Comanche violence. The Texas Rangers had officially been formed in 1823 by Stephen F. Austin, the eventual namesake of the now capital city. He hoped that the quote-unquote ranging companies could provide both a territorial patrol and a sort of quick reaction force to respond to raiding in the area. In the ensuing 14 years, the Rangers have met with varying degrees of success and faced numerous setbacks and challenges in regards to both manning and arming their forces. At this point in 1837, just after the Texas Revolution, the entirety of the Texas frontier comprises the very bleeding edge of westward expansion. The pay for a prospective ranger is low, and the likelihood of a grisly demise at the hands of his enemy is comparatively high. They are armed with single-shot rifles and pistols, facing an enemy that is capable of unleashing several arrows a minute from a rapidly oncoming cavalry charge. Still, though they have at times seen casualty rates as high as 50%, the Rangers have proven thus far to be the only consistently, even marginally effective force fighting the Comanche. For their parts, these men inside Fort Colorado largely count themselves fortunate to have found such a vigorous, violent profession. However, on this night, most of them have resigned themselves to a restful, placid evening. But just as some of the men are about to turn in for the night, one of the Rangers on guard duty spots the flickering light of a campfire a few miles west up the Colorado River, on a high knoll overlooking a popular crossing spot near today's Lamar Boulevard. This, to say the least, is an unusual sighting. In such hostile territory, travelers of any kind, be they native, Texan, American, or Mexican, generally avoided illuminating their positions with campfires, as doing so oftentimes invited an ambush from the dreaded Comanche. However, as the Ranger studies the spectacle longer, he begins to see shadowy figures dancing back and forth in the flickering light. He reports his findings, and many among the men concur that the only party of warriors who would be so bold as to strike a campfire in the middle of Comanche territory would be the Comanche themselves. Even from afar, it is clear that this band of warriors is unconcerned with their own safety, believing themselves to be all but untouchable inside the confines of their rightful domain. Now, the conversation amongst the Rangers shifts to whether or not an immediate attack should be made. The officer in charge, a veteran Ranger by the name of Captain Andrews, confers with some of the other veterans, all of whom argue for advancing upon the Comanche immediately. Charged with the safety and well-being of his men, however, Captain Andrews is momentarily reluctant to order his men outside of the walls of the fort, considering the risk of a night movement and of a surprise attack on an enemy force of unknown strength. His veteran Rangers, however, offer a simple and straightforward solution to this quandary by insisting that Captain Andrews needs only to ask for volunteers. Seeing this as a suitable compromise, Captain Andrews asks for volunteers and is roundly met with several Rangers ready to depart at once. These men double-check their weapons, load themselves with as much lead shot and gunpowder as they can carry, and mount their trusted war horses before riding out of the gates and into the dark of the hill country night. Leading the volunteers is Second Lieutenant Wren, another veteran Ranger. In total, there are 15 Rangers now making their way through this precarious country under the cover of night. Adding to the ominous air of this occasion, storm clouds soon roll in, further darkening the night sky. As they near the site of the Comanche camp, Lieutenant Wren, Joe Weeks, and Noah Smithwick advance ahead of the rest of the Ranger contingent to reconnoiter the area ahead. This task, simple enough on its face, becomes an hours-long endeavor that consumes the remainder of the night as the Rangers literally inch forward on their bellies through the brush and tall grass towards the Comanche camp. Finally, as the sun begins to crest the eastern horizon, the Rangers find themselves in plain view of the Comanche camp. However, their trajectory has placed them far closer to the Comanche's horse herd than they had initially planned. For a few tense moments, the Rangers hold their collective breath, as it seems all but certain that the remuda of Comanche horses and mules will be spooked by their presence, inevitably alerting their owners. But miraculously, the animals continue grazing, seemingly unfazed by the Rangers' presence. Scanning the campsite, the Rangers are astonished to see sleeping Comanches strewn all about the ground, seemingly sleeping off a long night of revelry. Now, having remained undetected, and having avoided potential calamity with the horse herd, Wren, Weeks, and Smithwick make a much more hastened crawl backwards, rejoining their comrades and reporting their findings. Here, they hurriedly lay out their plan for attack. The Rangers will divide their forces and sweep down upon the Comanche camp from two directions. Second Lieutenant Wren will lead the smaller contingent to the right of the cluster of cedar trees which holds the Comanche camp, while Noah Smithwick will lead the second, but larger contingent which will attack the Comanche camp head-on. With the morning sun now rapidly on the rise, the Rangers hasten forth to make their attack. As the surrounding birds begin to chirp, Smithwick moves his men into position, and then notices that, in the dimly lit morning hue, Wren has taken his party past the intended target, having mistaken which cluster of cedar trees he is to attack. With no means to communicate with his commanding officer, Smithwick knows that the only course of action now is to carry forward with the assault. Moments after Smithwick realizes Wren's mistake, the first of the Comanche warriors begins to stir awake, only yards away from Smithwick and his men. Still in a haze, the warrior sleepily pulls himself into a sitting position and then begins to sing his personal song, a long-standing Comanche tradition, as a greeting to the morning sun. However, the man singing has alerted Wren to his mistake, realizing that he is attacking the wrong cluster of cedar trees, and he now leads his contingent hurriedly towards the sound of the singing Comanche. The Comanche warrior, now alerted by the sounds of Wren and his rangers running towards him through the brush, jumps to his feet and attempts to run back to his cohorts in the camp. He sprints forward, crying out to his comrades that an attack is underway. However, he has scarcely gone but a few yards when a ball from Ranger Joe Week's rifle tears into his back, sending him tumbling to the ground, dead. Now, the Comanche are fully alerted, and the camp springs to life, with warriors attempting to arm themselves while making a retreat to a nearby ravine. Wren and Smithwick's forces now make a charge on the Comanche camp from their planned sides, unleashing a volley into the scrambling warriors, hoping to kill any and all that they can. Most of the Comanche, however, are able to make their way to the nearby ravine. From here, they begin to mount a counterattack of their own, pouring in arrows and bullets amongst the Rangers. A vicious battle ensues, with the Rangers taking cover and making repeated charges upon the Comanche in the ravine. On one of these charges, a Comanche bullet strikes the young Private Philip Martin in the head, killing him instantly. The Rangers, incensed at having incurred the loss of a much-liked young man, redouble their efforts to finish off the Comanche in the ravine. The fight continues on, but soon the Comanche are able to slip away from the ravine and disappear into the cedar breaks. They have left their horse herd and most of their belongings, most of which are plundered and claimed by the Rangers as spoils of their efforts. A thorough post-action examination of the battlefield is also made, in an effort to discern the damage inflicted upon the Comanche. As far as either Wren or Smithwick can tell, the first Comanche warrior to awaken and be fired upon had surely died where he had fallen. In his recollection, Smithwick recalls specifically that, in his charge toward the camp, he had stepped over the body of the fallen warrior, lying lifeless on the ground. But after the battle, the warrior's body is nowhere to be found. The body of Philip Martin is lashed to his horse, and the party somberly make their way eastward, back down the Colorado River, and into the confines of Fort Colorado. Here, Philip Martin is laid to rest with honors, alongside the body of a private who had been killed months earlier by an accidental rifle discharge. The Rangers will go on to refine their techniques and tactics in combating the Comanche, and the Comanche, for decades to come, will assert their dominance over the whole of central and northern Texas via vicious warfare and raiding. In the annals of the history of the conflict between the Rangers and the Comanche, this conflict, however minor, is indicative of the all-too common succession of events that would occur countless times across the Texas frontier. For their parts, many of the men serving at Fort Colorado will go on to fulfill and even extend their enlistments with the Rangers, continuing on to legendary careers on the violent expanses of the Texas frontier, as well as in the brutal fighting of the Mexican-American War. Noah Smithwick would go on to pen an autobiography that is regarded as one of the most comprehensive accounts of early Ranger life left by one of their own. It is replete with tales of conflict, camaraderie, violence, and vengeance, and is an invaluable resource for anyone interested in further reading on this fascinating, often overlooked era in history. But the many tales of Noah Smithwick, as well as his fellow Rangers, and the mighty, fearsome Comanche warriors with whom they fought, are, for tonight, other stories for other times. Thank you again for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. Be sure to click the like button, share this episode with a friend, and become a subscriber. Also, if you'd like to support our work and gain early access to episodes as well as ad-free viewing, you can become a member of this channel by clicking on the join button down below. Also, be sure to follow us on TikTok and Instagram and subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.